Coming up, a story about a family and the airline it started.
I would find it hard-pressed to believe that somebody could do a better job than my family has.
For more than 60 years, the Seybert family controlled the fate of PenAir. Now, it's on the auction block.
There's not a whole lot of airlines banging the door down to come out here, though. We don't know if things are going to get better or if they're going to get worse.
Ahead, what triggered these turbulent times and why communities the company serves want answers.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers. One of the things we Alaskans have in common, air travel, because there are simply no roads to get to a lot of the places that we need to go. That's why regional airlines like PenAir are so important. But come October, the company goes on the auction block. A bankruptcy trustee has ordered the sale. People on St. Paul Island, a small community about 800 miles west of Anchorage, have a close eye on this. That's because PenAir is the only airline that provides passenger service to the island, a route that is one of the most challenging in Alaska.
This time we would like to board all passengers for flight 271 in service to St. Paul.
A flight from Anchorage to St. Paul Island is almost as long as one to Seattle. That is, if you make it there. And for a while, it looked like we would. The flight to St. Paul is about 3 hours, and we were about 2.5 hours into the flight when we felt the plane suddenly bank and then turn around to Anchorage. The reason? The fog moved in and
the wind picked up and we had to turn around. And unfortunately, that happens quite a bit.
That's why for many of the passengers,
You doing okay?
it wasn't their first attempt to reach the island.
We had to fly to Dillingham, and then from Dillingham we turned around instead of going all the way out.
Lynette Mack was on her way to a workshop, but after several tries, had to give up.
I'm really sorry that we couldn't get you out there today. Hopefully the weather will be better tomorrow.
We rescheduled for that flight, but it was canceled due to weather, and there were no seats left on the next one, so we became part of a big backlog of passengers. We eventually made it to St. Paul Island. We wondered how long the fog would keep us here, yet we had to admit it was beautiful.
There's a few seals out there swimming. For me, the island has healing powers. It can relieve stress.
But one thing there is a lot of stress about lately, service from PenAir.
You may have a week, 2 weeks, even longer delay because they're not sending a makeup flight.
Phil Zavadil, the island's city manager, says people are fed up and want another airline to serve them.
We used to be able to fly out here, not worry about if your bag was going to get bumped.
Today, it's a different story.
Now they tell you up front that which bag do you want to go with you and which one do you want to be bumped.
And on this island, that can be a real problem when there's business involved.
We had a guy scheduled to work on our water tanks and do some repairs. His tools didn't make it with him. He was here for a week. We still had to pay for all that cost. Yet no work could happen because the specialized tools needed to do that didn't make it on the plane. So we had to bring him back, paying extra money.
The community took it hard when PenAir sent it a letter about plans to suspend service for 2 weeks in July for aircraft maintenance, a period which would inevitably stretch out longer due to seasonal weather delays.
It's been deplorable.
Amos Filimonoff is president of the tribal government, which oversees medical care for the community.
Simple medical problems are perhaps turning into medevacs where we've got to call in, the life flight to come in and pick people up because we can't get them out on the regular passenger service anymore.
Filimonoff says the tribe and other local organizations are actively working to bring in another airline. They're also doing what they can to upgrade their airport so bigger planes can land here.
Genuinely, we're all concerned of what's going to happen, especially with this sale going on. We don't know if things are going to get better or if they're going to get worse.
On a beautiful day, PenAir is a welcome sight. Passengers feel lucky to get here.
Sometimes, even on days like this, they'll cancel a beautiful day like this.
Isolation is a big part of life here. That is, after all, why the seals chose this island to breed and raise their pups. But unlike the humans here, they can come and go when they please. PenAir says it costs about $3,000 an hour to fly the plane that we were on. So basically, the day that we almost got to St. Paul Island turned into a 6-hour flight to nowhere and back with about an $18,000 price tag. That's why the tickets range between $800 to $1,200. But that doesn't always cover all of the costs. Up next, what it takes to run an airline in some of the most challenging routes in Alaska.
Every time we take off, we have to have 1,000 miles worth of gas. And we have to land on a 3,900-foot runway and carry 45 passengers. There is nobody else in the world that's doing what we're doing when we do that.
The Alaska aviation business, why it's not for the faint of heart. From mail to groceries to medical care, airlines touch almost every aspect of rural Alaska. And that's been the case for PenAir, a company that specialized in serving the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands.
The blue flights are flights that are in progress.
In the aviation business, the search for solutions is a moving target.
So I've got 3 airplanes in the air right now, heading down the chain.
But Danny Seybert loves the chase.
So he has 300 minutes to complete that flight. That's how closely we monitor each flight.
If this flight is delayed much more, it will be canceled because the pilot will reach the legal limit for his shift and must take 10 hours of rest.
Just the pilot issue alone added $1 million a year to our cost to operate and didn't make us any more efficient.
Or flexible enough to deal with constant variables like the weather. Take the route PenAir flies out in the Bering Sea between St. Paul and St. George Islands, one that the airline has flown since 1977.
So half the time, for more than 40 years, we fly out there and we fly back and we don't get in. That's just the way it is out in the Aleutians.
So why serve that market if it seems, so challenging?
Who else is going to do it?
Someone just might. Soon, PenAir's bankruptcy trustee will announce the bidders. It's got to be difficult to realize that come October that you could lose control of this airline that's been in your family for so long.
Well, it's not a pleasant feeling, but then again, we have built an airline that today is the right airline for the region.
PenAir got its start in 1955.
So when my dad was 18 years old, he bought this airplane and he started PenAir.
A doctor's request to fly patients to the Dillingham Hospital is how it all began.
Our only goal that I've ever known in my entire life is to take care of the people in the communities, and I would find it hard-pressed to believe that somebody could do a better job than my family has.
Today, PenAir is one of the longest operating family-run airlines in the nation.
Historically, in the 60-plus years that my family has run this operation, if we get a 3% return, we're having a fantastic year. More years than not, we've lost money in this business.
Now, the airline is deep in debt. Seybert says the company owes about $19 million. Some blame Seybert's decision to expand into the lower 48 to serve markets in Portland, Denver, and Boston.
I definitely bit off more than I could chew.
But the strategy behind it, Seybert says, was sound. So when Alaska Airlines pulled out of the Dutch Harbor Unalaska market, PenAir saw an opportunity.
We became, by default, the only airline that was still left serving Unalaska. And we had the wrong airplane.
So Seybert bought what he thought was the right airplane, this Saab 2000, small enough to land on Unalaska's short runway, but big and powerful enough to do the job.
So with this airplane, we can go to Unalaska with 45 people and all their bags and go nonstop in 2 hours.
Seybert saw dollar signs serving a year-round commercial fishing hub, but didn't foresee how this purchase would trip dominoes of debt. Once he bought the Saab 2000, he didn't need his smaller Saab 340s, which were still on long-term leases. So why not put those planes to work in places like the Northeast, connecting small airports to hubs like Boston? Another bonus, about 75% of PenAir's new routes came with government subsidies. But there was a problem with Seybert's Saab 2000. It wasn't certified to fly commercially in the United States. Its cockpit, for example, had to be retrofitted to meet federal standards.
So we had to design, build, and install a bulkhead and a cockpit door in this aircraft. And for each one we did cost about $800,000.
As the delays and dollars added up, profits in PenAir's lower 48 markets began to dry up.
It takes time to build up your market and build up your business. And unfortunately, with all the other things that were happening, we didn't have time to build the market and get the revenue we needed from those two hubs.
Also, the addition of the Saab 2000 to PenAir's fleet lowered its mail rate, the bread and butter for a lot of airlines. So PenAir wound up turning over its air freight business to Ace Cargo.
This is the right airplane for the Aleutians.
But still, Seybert has no regrets about his Saab 2000s.
Now that I've got it certified and now that it's flying, we have a great business. That's why people are looking at it and they want to buy it.
So you did all the work and somebody else may benefit.
Yes.
Now we're just bumping it up minute by minute because we got the arrival time at 12:23 now.
PenAir's payroll, more than 400 workers. At stake, their future and the communities they serve.
Always in the history of aviation, somebody will step up and serve those markets.
And you're just hoping it's you.
And it's going to be me.
Seybert says, don't count him and his family out just yet.
Well, I'm 57. And I started flying when I was 14.
Whatever happens, PenAir has left its mark on Alaska aviation history.
And going forward, my family will still be a part of it somehow.
When we come back, Scott McMurran will give us the 360-degree overview of Alaska's aviation system, fragile yet remarkable and always in a constant state of change. Only a few years ago, PenAir's route system was much bigger. At one point, it took in a huge swath of the state, all the way from Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, to Unalakleet in Norton Sound. Then, at the end of 2016, it pulled out of Unalakleet and Aniak, a hub community on the Kuskokwim River. And then just recently, it pulled out of another route in the interior, its flight from Anchorage to McGrath, one of the big stops on the Iditarod Trail. Change for PenAir has been in the air for quite a while. And here to help us see the big picture, Scott McMurran, publisher of Alaska Travelgram. Now, usually you cover the deals, the trips to the lower 48, but you've been keeping an eye on this PenAir situation. Why?
Well, never mind the people in these communities are our brothers and sisters. They're fellow Alaskans. It's important that we have good and reliable transportation to and from. But from a selfish point of view, PenAir also serves places like King Salmon. In addition to the big fishery there, it's also the gateway to Katmai National Park and that beautiful country, the Valley of the 10,000 Smokes and so forth. And also in St. Paul Island and the Pribilofs, the Pribilofs are regarded as the Galapagos of the North. And so for that small and yet growing travel component of people who like to go out there, a lot of them are birders. I call them bird brains.
It's kind of the travel ecosystem of Alaska.
Yes, it's a real eco-travel destination for sure.
Well, a lot of people, though, were very puzzled by PenAir's entry into the lower 48 market. And perhaps we could talk about what PenAir was thinking about when it did that. And let's take a look at the Boston market that it broke into. I mean, that's kind of like far away from Alaska. What was the reason behind that?
Well, it's not unusual for a regional airline to go and chase essential air service routes.
And that means you get a subsidy.
That's exactly right. The federal government decides that this particular city pair needs consistent air service, and then they write a check that they put the route out to bid, and PenAir won the bid. And so...
But then they lost it a couple of years later.
Well, they did. Just a few months ago, they lost it. And this is the problem with essential air service bids, is they come and go.
Now we have the Denver market that they broke into.
Yeah, they did indeed. Serving hotspots like Scotts Bluff and Kearney, Nebraska. Okay, now that's a little counterintuitive for an Alaska airline, but again, the Department of Transportation simply takes bids, and they look at the reliability of the aircraft, the culture within the company in terms of whether they have safe operations, and whether it's a good fit, and of course, how little they can pay. Okay,
that's the bottom line.
But that is the bottom line.
It seems like though the West Coast move with the hub in Portland, that's closer to Alaska. That makes a little sense. What happened there?
Well, again, they came into routes that other airlines had been flying and tried to make it work. Other Alaskan airlines, for example, Alaska Seaplanes, under the moniker of Seaport Air, tried to fly these routes with a Caravan and couldn't make it. And in comes PenAir and wows them with a larger aircraft, a Saab 340, flying into Coos Bay, flying to Crescent City. And then they branched out. I think they were flying to Pendleton for a while.
Now, you've talked with people in the industry about the PenAir move into these markets, and what did they tell you?
They said that on its face, it's not a bad move. But again, you have these winds buffeting the fiscal landscape, a pilot shortage. You have insurance rates going up. You have fuel costs, which are variable. I mean, for example, PenAir lost the bid in the East Coast, and they were supposed to serve that market through June, but they bailed out early because all their pilots are quitting. I mean, that's not the only reason, but I talked with the financier for PenAir in the bankruptcy process, and he said, Mr. Amron with Wexford Capital actually said that the whole operation simply imploded because of staff inconsistencies. They simply couldn't maintain the deal, and
well,
so
it is
problems.
A domino situation. One thing trips another. Yeah. So, what do you think about Danny Seybert's bid to try to buy his airline back? How realistic is that?
Well, if he can bring in partners that have the money and that can pay off Wexford Capital, who already has almost $5 million into it, then it's certainly plausible. He certainly knows the business.
We know that in the history of Alaska Airlines, it always seems like it's a struggle for the carrier to match the right airline to the task and then stay afloat with all the change in the sea of changing federal regulations.
Well, federal regulations is one part of it. But I mean, for example, this thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. PenAir wasn't born with these routes. They inherited them from Reeve. Reeve used to fly these routes with a 727 or an Electra, a 4-engine prop plane.
Well, those were great planes to ride.
Yeah, and so then PenAir changed, and they got rid of their air taxi operation. That's what started PenAir back in Pilot Station. I mean, Orin was flying, small planes, and they had a huge fleet of small planes. They got rid of those routes. They gave them to Grant. Okay, and so PenAir is changing, and this natural progression to try and use those planes and utilize them in other markets is not. I mean, it was sound on its face, but the devil's in the details.
Always the devil is in the details. And one man, I want to show his picture here, was good at helping Alaska aviators deal with the details, Senator Ted Stevens, and I hear many people in the industry really lament his loss to kind of get Alaska exceptions to cookie-cutter rules for the lower 48 and federal regulations.
There's no question about it. Senator Stevens was helped develop the Essential Air Service program, helped develop the Bypass Mail program. Both of those programs were important in essentially subsidizing the operation so that these communities in Bush, Alaska could have safe and reliable transportation. And our brothers and sisters in the lower 48 may understand, but may not fully appreciate the idea that we are, in many respects, quite isolated.
That's right. You know, kind of like Hawaii, we are our own separate universes.
Well, if you go out there to St. Paul, it really is an island, or to Dutch Harbor, they really are an island, or to Adak or Shemya.
And so you were saying that some of the delays on St. Paul Island that you experience are everywhere, basically.
It happens in Kodiak. It happens in Dutch Harbor. And it's so you know, weather happens. All of flying is weather.
So let's talk about your trip to St. Paul Island. It took us 3 tries to get there. How about you? I heard you went there this summer.
I went there on schedule, on time. Now, we were supposed to stop in St. George on the way back, but they canceled that second because the morning that we were supposed to fly back, I could barely see the hand in front of my face. They said, "Oh, don't worry about it." I'm thinking, weather. and sure enough, even at noon, it was like pea soup type of stuff.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. You have to appreciate how people make a living. I know those tickets are expensive, but I just think that, you know, you could hit a year with really bad weather and, you know, suddenly find yourself way over budget.
Just 2 weeks prior, we were on a St. Paul Island tour, you know, where you go and see the birds and the seals. They were canceling all kinds of flights, and it was just, you know, it's weather. They were having some real
So how
problems.
do you build a tourism industry like St. Paul is trying to do?
Well, it is that inaccessible, that unobtainium, these rare birds and unique marine mammal situations that sparks the allure. So people really do want to get out there, and the weather is just part of the deal. It's part of the deal. And so you turn that deficit into an advantage, into a sustainable advantage. You try and sell that rarity of actually getting out there on time, which apparently it was. We got out and got back, you know, no problem.
Well, I'm sure you had a great trip. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I recommend it.
All right, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us, Scott McMurrin. Well, we leave you now with some photos that the Seybert family shared with us, the aviation frontier that they put to the music of Al Koenig, a guitarist from Eagle River. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.